back. Joining me to discuss performance of the domestic fixed income and equities markets, as well as the just released inflation report and its impact on the market, is Ayodeji Ebo, Managing Director at Afrinvest Securities Limited. Ayodeji, it's good to have you with us. And
Thanks
good morning.
for having me.
All right. Let's take a look at the inflation report for May 2019, which showed inflation rate increased to 11.40%. Can you explain this and what are your expectations there?
Yes, based on the trend, we've seen a mild, consistent increase in inflation rates.
All right.
And looking at the major factors that are responsible for this, based on the data, increased from 11.37% to 11.4% in May. And if you break that further, you will discover that food inflation, which is significantly higher than even the headline inflation, around 13.7%, has continued to increase. On a month-on-month basis, the food inflation increased by 1.4%. And that can be attributed to, one, we're still in the beginning of the planting season. And you know the cycle in Nigeria, the storage is very poor, so there's always that seasonality that you see.
And even the last forecast itself, it was about food inflation as well.
Yes, yes, it was because when you look at planting season, this would subside a bit as we approach from around July, August. Yeah. In addition to that, also the conflicts that we're seeing, especially in the Middle Belt, where you have the food basket of the nation. You also have some crises within the northern part of the country. So farmers are also not able to plant. And during the last planting season, we didn't see as much farmers because of the herdsmen crisis. So when you look at the combination of those factors, it's significantly pressuring food prices. And it's what government needs to focus on that. That is, despite when you look at the core inflation that excludes food index, you would discover that core inflation has been moderating, but because of the continued increase in food inflation,
indeed,
that has not been impact. We've not been able to see that impact on the overall headline inflation. So in terms of our outlook, we expect that based on if we're able to, in terms of the planting season, by June, July, August, we feel that food inflation should moderate, while core inflation may remain around this level. So we feel, based on our expectation, we still project that inflation rate will average around 11.3% for the year. And when you also want to consider its impact, when you compare it to yields in terms of fixed income markets, you see that inflation rate 11.7, yields is still around 13%, though the spread has continued to thin out. For short-term instruments are currently below inflation. So it's some of the concern that even the CBN would also be trying to see how rates can also, to have positive rate return, how rates can be higher than inflation rate. And that's why even for those that are trying to invest in fixed income securities, most of them are going for long-term instruments rather than the short-term instruments.
Yeah, indeed, Ayodeji, but sometimes the reality on ground is that you tend to think that the forces of demand and supply when it comes to food inflation are not being followed. It's a peculiar nature with the Nigerian environment, regarding this.
But we saw that, last month was the fasting season, and the price of grains increased significantly. It was also a major factor that played out and that contributed to the spike that we saw in food inflation, looking at a month-on-month basis of 1.4%.
Right, very good. Now, let's take a look at other issues. Airtel-Africa's plans to list shares on the NSE and, of course, the London Stock Exchange. What do you make of this development?
Yes, it's interesting. Still riding on the excitement of the listing of the MTN shares on the Nigerian Stock Exchange, where we saw significant interest across the country. And riding on that positive wave, I think Airtel is Airtel is trying to, beyond the listing, will also raise capital via initial public offer, IPO, which will give the opportunity to all investors, new investors, to be part of the company. Yeah, they are looking at a dual listing on the London Stock Exchange as well as the Nigerian Stock Exchange. Though based on their estimate, they're looking at a price of about 80 to 100 pence. And in terms of, when we look at multiples, currently MTN is trading at an enterprise value and EBITDA of around 5 times. And you also want to consider looking at other, and the average within the emerging markets and telecoms industry is about 5.6 EV EBITDA multiple in terms of the multiple. So we feel that though we've not seen the financials to analyze, to be able to look at in terms of the pricing, also trying to also establish what entity will be listed in Nigeria. Is it the African company or just the Nigerian business that will be listed? Because that's also part of what would be factored into the valuation. But we feel that the interest would also be very strong. And it's also interesting that we're beginning to see new listings of major companies in Nigeria, and that will also help in terms of looking at the representative of the GDP. The NSE rather will now be mirroring how our GDP is also sectionalized.
Indeed, and I asked a question not too long ago that there's a possibility we might see a bit of healthy rivalry between these major telecoms companies slugging it out at the stock market at this rate.
No, it's interesting when you look at Airtel is the third largest. Airtel is the third largest telecom, so that's MTN is still the largest, and it gives them avenue to raise capital, and also for even the subscribers, their customers, they will have that sense of ownership. That I use Airtel line, I use MTN line, and I also have MTN shares. So it gives them that form of ownership, and I feel that that's why we've seen that significant interest being generated around the telecom, because for them, you don't need to explain in terms of the kind of business they do. We all make calls, and we know how they generate their revenue. That's why you'll see that significant interest. If it's a new company that, even if it's the same turnover size, and you need to explain what they do in terms of their business, you may not see as much interest. But with the telecommunication sector, and you have over close to 100 subscribers, 100 million subscribers, million subscribers, the news is already out. They know exactly what kind of business that they do and how they earn their revenue.
Very good. Now, how has Nigerian equities market performed this month as we approach the end of the first half of 2019?
Yeah, it's still been very soft. If you look at it's been very volatile. We've been seeing marginal declines, more of declines than gains. And we still feel that it can be attributed to the weak investor sentiment that we still observed. We feel that the market should be policy driven. Nothing major, no major policy has come from the government. With the inauguration has passed, June 12th, Democracy Day has passed. We are still all waiting to even see the quality of cabinet that would shape the direction of policies in Nigeria.
I guess that anticipation is still there, you're right. Now, ahead of the first half of 2019 corporate earnings releases, can you provide any stock picks for equities investors here?
Yeah, I think the banking space will still be the major favorite. And the major reason is that prices of these stocks have declined significantly. And if you are looking at it in terms of dividend yield, that has improved. The dividend yield is just your dividend per share over the market price. So that is also a major factor that would attract investors within that space. It will be followed by the industrial goods space, where you have the likes of Dangote Cement, and one major strength or factor that would be assisting that particular sector is that we know that Nigeria, in terms of housing deficit, is still very huge, about over 17 million housing deficit. Also, government is also trying to see how, in terms of even road construction, if there's going to, we are expecting that there will be a lot of construction, and
Indeed.
also they will also be able to supply in terms of inputs within that space. So that will also continue to drive that sector. So Dangote Cement within that space will also be a major pick. The consumer goods, yes, feel that in terms of their half-year releases, yes, for some of them may be very interesting, but you also want to look at some of the major issues in terms of importation. The Apapa crisis is a major bottleneck, and it's costing them a lot.
That's true.
And when you look at the number of days, for some of the companies that in terms of your inventory days, that shouldn't be more than maybe 30 days based on what some of them are forced to keep as high as 180 days because you don't know when you'll be able to clear your goods, and you also want to sustain in terms of meeting the demand of your customers. So that's a major area. And you also, it was last week that that customs has also reviewed in terms of the exchange rates from 306 to 326. It means that in terms of import duties, and most of these companies too still import a lot of their inputs.
They do.
So in terms of the costs, may also increase going forward into Q3. But you also want to look at in terms of, are they able to pass that cost to the customers? The economy is still struggling, consumer pockets still very squeezed.
Indeed.
And as a result, it may just tell on their margins. They may want to absorb that cost initially before they see an opportunity. So consumer goods is also a space to also look out for. And lastly, another sector that may be of interest is the agri sector. We have Presco within that space and Okomu Oil. A lot of the companies are also looking domestically in terms of sourcing for raw materials. Yep. So we've seen that boost significantly in terms of their revenue, and they are also they also export. Yep. So to them too, they also get foreign earnings. So in terms of the topics, those major sectors are the sectors that we feel that the investors should focus more on in the second half.
Very good, Ayodeji Ebo of Afrinvest. I'd like to thank you for your enlightenment on those issues. It's always a pleasure to have you.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you. And you're watching the Global Business Report here on Arise News. Up next, Nigeria is being advised to embrace zero-coupon bond to manage the high interest expenses on debt. On this, when we return, stay with us.